Welcome, welcome to Book Passage and one of our first in-person events, certainly first of this size. So thank you for showing up. Yeah. With that, I want to say we are just so proud and honored to host today's event. We all know what Greg Sarris is to this community, and for him to finally have a memoir is just amazing. But please, so we can get started with a very important and special event, I'm going to bring to the stage our MC, Steve Wasserman.
Thanks very much. Where to begin? First of all, thank you to Book Passage for, I think this is the first in-store large event like this that we have had in 2 years since the pandemic. And so I'm incredibly grateful to everyone for showing up, feeling safe, I think, in all of this. And I want to just offer, this is the 35th anniversary of the founding of a quarterly magazine that Heyday is privileged to publish called News from Native California. And 5 years ago, I had the great privilege of being at the Autry Museum down in Los Angeles to mark the 30th anniversary, and I'm so delighted to be able to. I see many friends and colleagues and mentors here in the audience. I just want to acknowledge, and we have a number of people here, especially Malcolm Margolin, who has pride of place here. Without whom I certainly wouldn't be at this podium, and without whom so many of the beautiful and wonderful and world-changing books would not have been published. And we have always envisioned ourselves as midwife to the birth of ideas of others more talented and more articulate than we could be on even our best day. I also want to take the occasion to offer up a kind of land acknowledgement, to acknowledge that we are guests in the lands of the coastal Miwok and southern Poma, who now enjoy the rights of the Federated Indians of Great and Rancheria. And Greg Sarris, as you know, is in his 15th term as tribal chairman. And this date and this book of his, Becoming Story, is important to me in a personal way. I met Greg, I won't bang on about this too long, but I met Greg nearly 30 years ago when I was the editor of the LA Times Book Review, and he was a tenured professor at UCLA, and he would occasionally contribute these wonderful pieces to the book review, which I was privileged to publish. What can I say? Time passed, the world turned. His life took a development unforeseen by his. I was often mistaken when I lived in Los Angeles from being from New York, so at some point I had to embrace my fate and actually move there. And then more time passed, and when the opportunity arose to help write Heyday's second chapter nearly 6 years ago now, I somersaulted back to California, where I had grown up, and received a most astonishing letter from Greg welcoming me back to California, welcoming me to this post. And he, like so many of you in this audience, have remained a stalwart friend and supporter of Heyday and its work. So I'm incredibly grateful, and there are many people in the audience who I'd love to single out by name. I'm not going to do so, but their books are on sale here. There are recent books by many of the authors in this room, and I hope you will wander around not only among the books that we publish, but also the embarrassment of riches that is every day the good work of the booksellers of Book Passage, a justly renowned store, not only essential to this community, but widely known throughout the rest of the country. I mean, this is really a magnetic pole of literature, and I'm just so grateful to see this hall filled with so many of you. I want to introduce, we're going to watch a couple of videos. We have a book trailer. We at Heyday, like every publisher, have to do what we can to cut through the noise of the culture and get attention for these deserving books, because it avails no one anything if we produce beautiful books written by wonderful authors and they just languish in our respective garages. That is not the the work we do. We want to get these books out to people, so we are taking advantage of everything that modern means of communication can make possible, and to the extent that our resources can support. So we have a couple of clips, one of them graced by one of the strong supporters of Greg over the years, Carol Hart, and we have another clip that involves Deborah Miranda, whose book Bad Indians is one of Heyday's, how to put it, foundational books, which has been such a tremendous success over the years and has really meant a great deal, giving voice to those who have formerly remained too little heard. So without further ado, let's screen those trailers and the video clips, and then I'll be back.
Winter. Renowned pommel basket weaver and Dr. Mabel McKay, who I was fortunate to have known, explained the rules about the ancient time stories. Only tell them in winter, after the first frost and before the last frost. For Coast Miwok people, like all indigenous peoples of Central California, the landscape was nothing less than a richly layered text, a sacred book. Each feature of the natural world was a mnemonic peg on which individuals could see a story connected to other stories and thus know and find themselves home. Spring. Mabel McKay, she told me about this too. Coming out time, she said, which is how the season was described quite literally by many native California cultures. New growth, blossoms, sedge sprouting on creek banks, when, after winter, it is no longer safe to tell stories, not only because you must pay attention to where you are going, watchful for snakes and such, but because you too are coming out, becoming story. Summer. Something about the glare of noon, or nearabouts noon, because summertime, that hour feels like eternity, the essence of the season itself, halfway between here and there, stopped. Something about the stillness of light and the motionless surface of the green river. My family traces its history to the river. As indigenous people in Sonoma and Mendocino counties, we all do. My great-great-great-grandmother Supu was born near Petaluma. Her son, who was Tom Smith, would later build his ceremonial roundhouse on the Jenner Head. There, he preached about the importance of remembering our traditions, the rules of living with the land. Pointing to the river, he said, like that water, we are connected to everything, its memory. Fall. Mabel McKay used to say, it is a prayerful time. Pay attention because you are taking from the earth what you will need to live on during the winter. I imagine my ancestors hereabouts in this autumn twilight. Men and women sort through a cache of acorns spilled on the ground. Their faces and the rich designs in the upturned burden baskets flicker in the firelight. This is fall. Each story that rises from the landscape takes on its purple hue as far as I can see. The sky, like an upturned basket, reaches to the horizons. At this moment, I could turn it upright and carry it off.
Hey, my name's Carol Hart. I am a close friend of Greg Sarris, and I couldn't be more proud to be speaking about this amazing, amazing book that Greg has written of short stories about his life. And, you know, it's a funny thing, the way the chapters are laid out seasons, places, trees, and ancestors, it would imply that he's dividing those things up. But what I found, and this is so true of a conversation you'd have with Greg, is it's a weaving of all of those things into most amazing story. And having known Greg now for, gosh, I don't even know, over 20 years, one of the best parts of my life is a conversation with Greg Sarris. And for people that don't have an opportunity to have Greg in their life, he's a pretty busy guy. This book is a conversation with Greg Sarris, and it's almost impossible to tell you how enjoyable and what a great experience it is. So the thing that I think, for years, I was the regional parks director here in Sonoma County. So I worked with Greg and the tribe during that time, but Greg and I have become much closer in recent years over our shared love of horses and riding. And we have a horse here that's his, that Savannah, that he really loves. And when you go riding, or for that matter, whether you go driving around Sonoma County, you pass the areas that Greg talks about in the book, whether that's Sonoma Mountain, Petaluma, or Wooler Bridge, which is right near, reasonably near, about a 10-minute drive from where I live. And after you've read the book, there is no way you can go to these places and not really stop. Whether you're on a horse, whether you're on a bike, or whether you're on a car or walking, you have to stop and think about all of the things that have happened there. It's like you can look out on the river from the bridge and see the beaches and imagine everything for thousands of years that has gone on there. And for those of people that don't live in Sonoma County or haven't been here, it doesn't matter, because it's still a way of thinking about wherever you are, in all of the layers, the cultural layers, the natural layers, the wildlife, to see it fully and experience it fully. And that's really what Becoming Story is about, because that's how Greg experiences life. He has an incredible connection to wildlife, to his cultural history, to the seasons, all of the things that are described here, in the title. And as my friendship is with Greg, the book just, it's everything that makes me enjoy him so much. And I think it's going to be a great night as people get to hear more about the book from Greg.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Miranda. I want to tell you a little bit about Greg Sarris's new book, Becoming Story, A Journey Among Seasons, Places, Trees, and Ancestors. These essays are like the California landscape, rich with story, multi-layered mixtures of grief, beauty, tenderness, mystery, and laughter. My favorite essay is the one titled, If Oprah Were an Oak Tree. Greg first explains the dry science of sudden oak death, the economic and personal impact of the tree disease in California. He's looking at an infected old oak at his home, then catches part of a late-night Oprah rerun, and wonders, is there any chance the tree will survive? Can we find a cure? Could Oprah help? Better yet, what if Oprah were an oak tree? The oak tree outside my window, for instance. And so Greg begins to outline an amazing parable that works to use media powers to give a voice to an ancient oak tree facing the arbor side of its kind. If Oprah were an oak tree, Greg imagines, and had a television empire at her command, what would she do? How about the Live Oak show and O for Oak magazine? Greg's imaginary hit show shares Tree Oprah's favorite things: nutritious ash from prescribed burning, pruning methods, birds who help control parasites, companions like peppergrass and clovers who help maintain water retention. The upshot of Oprah as an Oak looks at the phenomenon that allows us to occupy our homes and the lands on which they stand without actually knowing much about that land. Greg says we are strangers where we live, and we set our gaze upon bigger houses, more money, the next step up the career ladder. And it's this distance, this lack of relationship, this lack of knowing how to be in relationship with the other parts of ourselves, the world and its non-human complexities and entities, that prevents us from seeing our own complicity in the failing environmental health of our world and keeps us from engaging with the tree, the image of the tree. If Oprah were an oak tree, Greg says, would we finally pay attention to the trauma of oak trees and all that this trauma means for our larger environmental health? Thank you, Greg. Everyone should read this essay and this book. I can't wait to hold the real book in my hands.
I'm going to welcome Greg. I just want to say that this book is written with a plain-spoken eloquence that derives its meaning from a deep and intimate exploration of an elusive subject which resonates very powerfully, differently with people all over the world, which is, it raises the question, what is home? Where is home? It explores feelings of exile, and it explores the ways in which things become meaningful as they're imbued with story in close dialogue with everything in our abundant world. And so at the start of the book and at the end of the book is a kind of eloquent case made for hope and resilience, even though the pages of that natural world are scattered and often broken, and the through lines of that story are up to us to tease out and to connect. Without further ado, please welcome Chairman Greg Sarris of the Federated Indians of Great and Rancho and author.
Thank you, Steve. Wow. Thank you, everybody. I mean, this is, I've always been a writer and a thinker, and a sort of an egghead, and of course I've got involved with the other things with my tribe, of course. But I see everybody here. I see all my egghead friends. I see my tribal family here, tribal council members. I won't start naming people because I'll never stop. But I do want to thank Carol Hart, who's here, and of course Deborah Miranda for this. And so just, Carol, that was just too nice. The truth of the matter is the horse that she and Mickey got me has caused so much trouble on their place that I feel forever indebted to them about that. But it was their idea, not mine. Anyway, I'll read a portion, and then we have a great Obi Kaufmann is here, and we're going to talk for a while, and then I'll sign books. So again, thank you, everybody, for coming. It means a lot to me. Thank you to the bookstore. You know, I like to quote Gregory Bateson, if we're all going over a cliff, we still have two choices. One is to drop with the lemmings as we go. The other is to scream as we go and say, hey, there's another way. People who read books, people who think we're screamers, keep screaming. That's all we can do, and it's the best thing to do. And as I say to my students when I leave the classroom, just remember it's not a sin to think. Let's see. I'll start actually with. They said 5 minutes, and I think I might be 5.5. I don't know. Am I going to get in trouble? All right. This is the first essay of the seasons, and it's short enough so that I think I fit in the time frame. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody can hear me all right? All right. Just scream or something if you can't. All right. Frost. Winter. Not ancient stories about the time before this one, when the animals were still people, before Coyote messed things up with his hapless machinations. Nor the dark room, warm but still black as the cold midwinter night outside, with nothing but the floating voice of the storyteller impersonating the people in the stories. Crafty Coyote's devious whispering, Blue Jay's shrill admonishments, Frog's old man rasp, Quail, the most beautiful of all people, her gentle as brookwater songs. None of those things, but cows. Feeding the cows, their cloven hooves planted in the frost-covered earth, nostrils blowing steam above the unfastened bale of alfalfa. I would stand, warming my hands in my coat pockets, for hours watching the cows. I had a good eye then, not just for an old cow's swollen knee or maybe a rheumy eye, but even the faintest rise in her hide indicating the presence of a grub. And the alfalfa, too. It was best if you could see dried purple flowers, sign of an early June harvest, after just enough warm weather. I was 7. I had no cows of my own, but followed the local dairyman. I wanted a cow. No Indians at home either. I was adopted. At the time, I knew nothing of my birth father, Emilio Hilario, or my Coast Miwok heritage. That would come 20 years down the road. And I would hear about the things the old-timers did, winter activities, storytelling, for instance. Renowned pomo basket weaver and Dr. Mabel McKay, who I was fortunate to have known, explain the rules about the ancient time stories. Only tell them in winter, after the first frost, before the last frost. Think about them then, their meanings, not in summer, when there's snakes and things in the grass and you need to pay attention to where you're going. But that has nothing to do with memory, what surfaces from experience, as I recall winter now. There was a man named Tommy Baca. He had only one arm, and he was a house painter. My mother said 1,000 times no one could mix color like Tommy Baca. He was a stocky man of medium height, with a broad, handsome face. He had thick, wavy black hair. He smiled a lot. I marveled at how he kept papers and such tucked against his side, just below his armpit, with the stub of his missing arm, and the way the stub would move, seemingly of its own volition, when he was excited, though I was careful not to let him find me looking. "Don't stare at people," my mother snapped. He was Indian, Coast Miwok. If I knew as much then, I don't remember, and certainly not the Coast Miwok part. What interested me was that he had cows. And because my parents were friends with him, I had access to the cows. There were steers, they were steers actually, mixed blood dairy calves, Guernsey and Hereford, which in those days you could get for a drop in the bucket, as the dairy farmers kept only their purebred heifers. Out at Tommy's place, west of town, I could spend hours with the critters. Once his son, Mark, about 7, like me, asked, "Why do you always look at Dad's cows?" And I felt as if it was a bad thing, like when other kids called me adopted. I'm not clear about this next part, what happened exactly. Maybe because for a month or more I was on cloud 9. Did I hear my parents and Tommy Baca talking in the kitchen after work one night? Did I hear about it that way before the afternoon out at Tommy's when he said, "Pick out the one you want. Take your pick"? A Guernsey and Hereford crossbred steer. I kept him in the field adjacent my parents' house. I named him Harry. Why I picked him from a lot of a half dozen others exactly like him, I don't know or remember. He proved intelligent. He knew the time of day precisely when I arrived home from school, and never failed to stand just inside the aluminum gate, always the same spot, waiting for me. He learned to genuflect, lowering himself on one knee so that you could scratch the crown of his head, and later, when he grew, to make it easier to climb aboard his back. Yes, we rode him. Every kid from the neighborhood in those days has a picture of himself or herself astride Harry. His horns grew, but he was gentle, careful even when he tossed his head to shoo flies or strew a flake of hay over the ground. Well, there was the one time, head lowered, when he charged Alan Cheney, chasing him out of the field, but no one cared, since everyone knew Alan was a bully and had no doubt provoked Harry. That was so long ago, a million stories ago, Of course, I found out who my father was, and now I can look back and understand things I hadn't the faintest idea of before. The connections between me and Tommy Baca, for instance. His grandmother, Maria Copa, sang for my great-great-grandfather, Tom Smith, the renowned Las Coast Miwok medicine man, as he doctored the sick. I can imagine them along the coast and through inland valleys, traveling in a wagon, and later in a Model T Ford. That box with the stuff of history spills. The ancient villages fall out, Olampali and Alaguali for Maria Copa, and Petaluma and Olamichka for Tom Smith. Then the Spanish galleons and English steamers, oceans crossed, wars, marriages, priests and soldiers, adobe and brick, overalls and Panama hats, and still clamshell disc beads and flicker feathers. And I see in that chance meeting of an adopted boy and a one-armed house painter the miraculous web that is all of time, nothing more, nothing less, all-inclusive. But it's memory that prevails still. Memory trounces this miraculous web. That is, if memory is not the vantage point from which I gaze upon it. No, not even Grandpa Tom's songs left on wax cylinders, or his ancient time stories left in a graduate student's dissertation. Not beads and feathers. Winter. It's feeding the cows, feeding Harry, and frost. The earth is blanketed with frost, a quarter thick at least, on the bare tree limbs, on rocks. Harry too is covered, topped, as with a layer of frosting. Harry steps into the sun to munch the alfalfa I just tossed over the fence, and I see the frost so cold, so powerful, begin to fall from his back, barely perceptible, trifling dust. And again, I'm not sure what happened exactly, whether I overheard fattened and spring grass in a conversation between my parents and Tommy Baca the night before, or months later, and didn't understand or chose not to. But at that moment I got it. Understood the whole story, what the words would mean after the last frost come summer. I might protest, but it would do no good. Never mind the purple blooms in the alfalfa. What a complicated and frightening world replaces winter. Thank you. Now what do I do?
We are directed that you're to take that seat. I want to welcome up another most valued Heyday author, the remarkable Obi Kaufmann. Is Obi in the house? Obi, as many of you know, is the indefatigable workaholic who has written, in just the brief time he and I have known each other over the last 5 or 6 years, 4 books. The California Field Atlas, State of Water, The Forests of California, and now with this, The Coasts of California. He has really invented something that simply didn't exist before. A remarkable artist, watercolorist, painter, naturalist, hiker. What these 2 artists have in common is, and if I could hang a sign over the 2 of them, it would be a very succinct injunction, admonition to all of you and to everyone who picks up their books. Pay attention. Pay attention to the world around you. And each of them, in his own way, has sought to tease out from the natural world and the world that resides inside each of them, which is in dialogue and in a dialectic over time and circumstance, as they fall through time and circumstance, and as all of we who accompany them do so. What is the story that is being told here? And that is the deep thread that I think unites both the fiction and nonfiction, the memoirs that Greg has so far written, as well as these remarkable explorations that Obi has done. I remember being at a gathering for California Field Atlas. It was a crowd of about 60 people in the Mechanics Institute, the wonderful library in San Francisco, and Obi stood up and gave a little talk, and there was a long line of people holding books they had bought, and second woman asked him, not unreasonably, how exactly does one use your book? And Obi, full of brio and blunt candor, looked at her and said, "Oh my God, you can't use it at all. It's utterly useless, this book. It's a fever dream poem it's a love affair with California, very fraught, very contested terrain, and it's my exploration of it. It's a completely useless book," whereupon the entire crowd gave him a standing ovation. I was bewildered as his publisher, but I thought, it's not broken. I'm not going to try to fix it. The only thing to do is let Obi be Obi. So here we are, the two of them, in a conversation. We don't like to silo authors in Heyday. We like to think of authors as part of this large extended family, but the truth of the matter is not every author has met every other author, and only recently have Greg and Obi met, and so my task here is really to get out of the way. So I'm going to vanish to the side and let them carry on for about 20 minutes, and we're going to privilege the conversation over questions for the moment.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, Obi. But I want to correct something already. You see, I have met you through your books, the almanacs. So that's a way of meeting people, Steve.
True. Yeah, I knew you then by how Mountain was made, right? So this was the book before. The first book that came out while I was already associated with Heyday a few years back, right? Much different quality of storytelling happening, isn't it? This book is a book of, well, really from sacred time, isn't it? That when a time in the past, and we're going to be talking, I think, I've done quite a bit of thinking about your book, Greg. Your recent book here, Becoming Story. I've been deeply moved by it. In fact, I would use the word, and I am going to use the word, unsettled, a purposeful word with a lot of meaning. I find that as I go through writing these big books about California, in this effort to find a space in my heart where I am more ultimately from here, if I can identify as such. And so today I'm going to react, I think, in conversation here with you now by asking you questions specifically toward some of the critical themes and symbols that I see in your book of memoirs here, Becoming Story, almost as if, like, for those of you who haven't read How a Mountain is Made, it's a great read. There are two characters, Coyote's granddaughters, who live on Sonoma Mountain, and some say that they're just a couple of crows on the fence. So I'm thinking that maybe we can be here. Oh, Coyote's granddaughters, question woman and answer woman, right? So answer woman can't remember anything without being asked the question from her twin sister.
That's absolutely true.
That's right. That's right. So I am just so thrilled to be here with you now. I'd like to start with a little passage that I found here that sort of gets to the heart of where I feel like I am missing the boat with my work about being from here. This is from your story. Osprey talks to me one day, talking about the Russian River. You say, the indigenous people do not think of the river as a 110-mile body of water as a geographer might. They didn't conceive of it as a single unit or phenomenon, but rather a continuum of interconnected places, no different from the way they understand all features of the wider landscape, each with its own character and story. The storied landscape thus is a sacred text, an outcropping of rocks, a mountain peak, the river mouth, all mnemonic pegs reminding us not only of the world we find ourselves in, but how to live harmoniously with it. So my question is, if I could ask you, Greg, now, how is it that your relationship to this place and even this place's relationship with you informed this work? Even out of time, how does the place itself be a character above even all the people in the book?
Obi, without sounding incredibly simplistic, it's because I think as an adopted kid, and a strange and different kind of kid, I was always, first of all, attentive to the animals and all the different families, and I would always hear the stories. And, on my original birth certificate, for the father, they identified him as Mexican, so I always thought I was half Mexican. I didn't know. But I was always looking for where I belonged. And it's interesting that so I knew the landscape, what it looked like. But then when I met Mabel McKay, and for some reason a lot of the older Indian people were always taking me aside, I guess because I was listening and trying to figure out where I belonged or how I fit in, they were always talking to me, telling me stories of places. And I would drive with Mabel, and she would just talk and talk story. And so all of a sudden, the shape of the land that I'd walked on, that I'd ridden horses on, that I milked cows on or whatever, all of a sudden that became more and more layered. And then, the time in the ways in which I began to find that I was connected to things. And then the way Mabel would, tell stories and, move around. And she once said to me, I would ask, well, what does that mean? And she said, don't ask me what it means. She said, life will teach you about the story the way the story teaches you about life. So it's a dialogue. It's a dialogue. Stories are there for us to dialogue with. You don't memorize, or it's not a religious text that you have to memorize, but it's something to live and become, because you're part of it. You're interacting with it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that bridge of meaning that you explore in this book across the geographies and across time, right? There's these constructs of time I want to get into also that are implicit throughout the book. But there's this place, right? Wharton Bridge.
Walder Bridge.
Walder Bridge. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Walder Bridge up there that separates sort of the western Russian River from the eastern Russian
That's
River.
right,
You
yes.
know, and that place represents a merger of all these different ancient cultures of indigenous Northern California here, but also people too. I'm called to this quote here from The Last Woman from Petaluma, when Tom Smith, my great-great-grandfather, told Isabel Kelly that his mother, Supa, who you mentioned in the video, was half Petaluma, half Tamales, and half Bodega.
Yeah.
Despite Tom's problematic math and the fact that no information can be found in mission or church records regarding Supa's parents, for that matter, for Supa herself, one can surmise that it is Supa's father who was from Petaluma. Since the customs, it goes on. But I was struck by that the blending of cultures that is embodied inside of you as being a primary dynamic throughout this book, trying to put yourself together.
Well, I think that all of us are. All of us are a culmination of the history that brought us here and the history that we're making as we sit here today. So I think all of that's coming, and we have to begin to think more and more that identity, the notion of identity, is not the walls of identity are not stuck. They're porous, and we live in a culture that is porous. Now, for California Indians, for example, as I like to say, the history of California is in our blood, because we were here, and everything that came here and somehow interacted with us. In my own tribe, with the Coast Miwok and Southern Pomo, 95, 98% of us were wiped out. And many of the survivors, the few survivors, were women who survived via being wives or concubines of the early Mexicans or Americans. And so you have this history of what we did to survive and the miraculous ability of those ancestors to continue the Indian stories so that the landscape, even as it's been transformed, remains in our minds textured with messages now for survival. I mean, that's what I think was so important. The great Kashiapomo prophet Essie Parrish said in the 50s that the world was going to start falling apart, the environment would be breaking down. And she said, all the things I'm telling you, you young people are leaving it like clothes on the floor. But she said a day's going to come when the non-Indians are going to be coming back to us and asking us what to do. And she said, that day is here. Now that I see that day is here. And I've told you the other story. I guess I'm talking, the old ones are talking to me right now. But Mabel McKay, I remember, I think I told you this, Obi, 45 years ago, we were driving back from Stanford. I would take her there, and all the professors, as Mabel said, always wanted to analyze her. She said they're too much with the questions. They'd ask her, how did you become an Indian doctor? And she'd say, like you, long time studying. But anyway, we were driving back. She was at the Yoshidehi reservation at that point, and I was driving her back. We were going through Fairfield. And it was fall, I believe, Obi, and the hills were very dry. And she looked out the window and she said, everything's going to go dry. It's going to get hot. Everything's going to burn. There's going to be no more water. She said, that's my latest dream, and we're coming to that point. And, she's a prophet, as was Mrs. Parrish. And, I'm a young guy, and I was dumber than I am now. And I said, well, Mabel, what do we do? And she laughed, and she said, that's cute. What do we do? And I said, no, I'm serious. What do we do? And she took, as we say in the theater, Obi, a silent beat, and she looked at me and she said, you live the best way you know how. What else?
That's beautiful. And I've thought about that a lot since you originally told me that anecdote about a month ago when we were up on Sonoma Mountain and you were showing me Coyote Village up there. There is a continuation from that story, though, in your book, in the last story there about the last human bear, Marie Evangeliste. Yeah. The idea of respect as being a guardian for survival. Right? And so that now respect is has a very specific context in the term in terms and in the framework of how Native people here get along and the history of true sustainability, which is a word I have so much problem with. We have no idea what sustainability is.
Because we're not seeing it, but anyway.
Yeah. Talk to me in 1,000 years about sustainability. Yeah. So could you talk about respect?
You hit really on a really important concept. As I always say, the Hollywood Indians started with Buffalo Bill were the Plains Indians, and the Europeans always thought that the Plains Indians were the most sophisticated because they had what Europeans understood and early Americans, organized warfare, right, and gave them the most trouble. So we always tend to see people in other cultures in terms of our own lens. And, the California Indians, there were more of us and speaking different languages, and the densest populations in the New World outside of the present site of Mexico City were right here. And people said, how did all these Indians here get along with one another with virtually no physical warfare? Well, what the Europeans didn't understand is we were much more subtle. We would poison you. You'd drop dead the next day. So, we had this whole thing about everything, whether it be the flowers, you, me, Sherilyn, anybody who is here has immense power. And if you violate that, their songs and protection is going to come back on you. And it may hit your child or somebody else. I remember the old people sitting around them, and they'd say somebody died, and they'd go, heart attack or stroke, And, of course, now the ethnographers and others characterized our cultures as being predicated on black magic. No, they were predicated on profound respect. Because you understood that even the smallest stone had power, had something that if you violated it and didn't respect it, it would come back on you. You were constantly reminded you weren't the center of the universe. And if you began to think that way, it would come back on you. The Kashaya Pomo word for the Europeans is palacha, which means miracles. And I always used to ask old people, why do you call white people miracles? And they said, because when they came here and they were chopping down trees and damming up water and killing the animals and killing people, instead of getting punished, more of them kept coming. And we thought they were miraculous. But as all of us sitting here today on this afternoon know, that miracle didn't last very long. 180 years, 200 years. There's not an ounce of air, there's not a square inch of air, there's not an ounce of water that isn't poison today. It's all come back on us. And the way to repair that, and you think it's so overwhelming, it's just more opportunity today, Obi, for us to begin to respect and understand the power of everything around us. And it's humbling, and I think that's what we need today, that humbling, because that's the only way things are going to change. It makes me think of an Irish poet, quote, Yeats, and he said, "This preposterous, pragmatical pig of a world would vanish on the instant if the mind would but change its theme." It's time for us to change the theme.
Well, it's certainly changing. It begins with electric communities such as this right here. I remember this man, Malcolm Margolin, told me a funny story a couple of years ago. He said, I don't really like books, which is funny. This is the guy who started Heyday Books, He said,
But you can't always. Malcolm was a storyteller, a trickster. You had to be careful.
Oh, for sure, for sure. But his point was, he says the book is the stone in the soup around which people gather.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's the real metric. Did I get that one right? Almost.
Well, I have a better, more interesting story.
Please.
About Malcolm. My aunt tried to tell him about love medicine in a song, and I think he got nervous and backed out. But I don't know. But yes, and as Mabel McKay used to say, whether you believe it or not, it's true. Yes. Yes. Malcolm knew a lot of my family, and he's got a lot of stories about them.
Well,
So.
I would like to turn it back to the deeply personal, because this book is deeply personal. You read a bit. One of the most interesting essays in the book, for me anyway, is this very strange little story called Scar. About fall, right? And so I saw the word scar, the title of the essay, and it's in the seasons,
Mm-hmm.
and it takes the fall place.
Yes.
In the order of seasons, and then so I'm thinking fire scar. I'm thinking about, but no, it's a scar on a body, on a human body, specifically one of your babysitters when you were young.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And there was, you seeing this scar. For me, as a map maker, as a son of a couple of scientists, I don't have any spiritual tradition to speak of. When I was a young man, my father said, "Mathematics is the language of reality."
Yeah.
And I sort of, to spite him, became a painter.
Yeah.
But still now,
Yeah.
I interact with that, quasi pathos really daily. And when I'm encountering and struggling with is making maps and telling what I believe is my story to California, realizing more and more that this is such a traumatized place, and to see it represented almost as a metaphor in this story as a scar across this woman's belly. And she wasn't a native woman. She was an Italian woman.
Italian.
Yeah, right. Was it struck me as a note of how the body and the land reflect each other, how we carry the wound. Am I completely off base there?
You're completely on. So thank you for reading that, because again, the seasons are also about experience. I started as a young boy, and I'm older and remembering. I have a more complex understanding of the world around me, and she covered that. But the one day in the story when her blouse had blown open, I forget exactly how I wrote it, and I saw that scar, and forever I thought about the world around me and its own scars, its trouble. I saw in that moment this environment, this world. I saw it all, and it is reflected in that way. We're not separate. Everything is living and interconnected. And so what I try to do so much, Obi, in the writing is try to share with the reader my dialogue with the landscape, with the stories of the landscape, with all the people of the landscape. So many of us people want to run away and go back. They want it to be just the way it was before. It's never going to be just the way it was before. Get over it. And remember, those people many of you who want the landscape just the way it was before are invasive species yourselves. Right? Of course, I get it in my family. I used to hear the old people, my aunt, your grandmother used to say to me, "Oh, I wish the white people would go back to Europe and all that." And I said, "Well, then, you're going to have to cut me in half." So, we're all here now. And the sun, the water, nothing's going to discriminate against who we are. I used to laugh. People would ask Mabel McKay, "Well, I'm white. Will your medicine work on me?" And she'd laugh and she'd say, "Well, you're human, ain't you?" We're all here. And so we have to find ways using, I think, the aesthetics and ethics of place that our ancestors had, that idea of humility as we face the challenges, And it will take science. It'll take science and poetry, the marriage of those two. I mean, we're here together and we have to work. Humility at the base of science is something. I mean, I like what the poet again, E. Cummings, said: "The better question asks the bigger better answer asks the bigger question," and that's kind of what scientists do. So, of course, they're just getting to now to understand what we always understood. But oh well,
On that reassuring note, I want to join in thanking them.
Is that all? That went fast.
I do have a gift for Greg. He's seen it before, but I'm going to present it to him now, and I guess you can see it on my Instagram if you want to see it. But I did a map of his whole book. I went through the book and found all the place names.
Oh my
and all the people there. So yeah.
And I did my homework. I was going to quote a couple wonderful quotes from The State of Water, Obi's book, which is wonderful. You should all read it. And I was moved, and there were a couple great quotes, and I said, well, why is Obi asking me questions? He's got all the answers in here. So
Hardly.